Thank you. Good evening. I'll tell you, there is nothing like worshiping with a group of people who love Jesus like you do to set the night off on a good start. I am a mom. This is something that Chris didn't mention. I'm a mom, and I had to work on my carpool schedule with another family today, and I did the math, and get this. My kids only have 7 more weeks before Christmas break. We are that close to the holidays, folks. And as I think about the holidays, I often think back to when I was a kid and some of the awesome holiday celebrations I had as a kid, especially on my dad's side of the family, the Ekman side of the family. My dad has 2 brothers and 2 sisters, all of whom have gotten married and all of whom have kids. I'm the oldest of 15 cousins on that side of the family. So Grandma and Grandpa Ekman, when they would gather us all, when they were alive, and would gather us all at holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas coming up, I mean, do the math on that. There were like 27 of us just to begin with. And Grandma and Grandpa didn't have one table that all of us could sit around. So Grandma and Grandpa Ekman came up with a very clever solution involving 2 tables. They created the adults table and the kids table. I see some of you have eaten at Grandma and Grandpa Ekman's house also. This is a slide of the Ekman family kids table, like circa 1979 or so. That's my cousin Stephen on the right, my brother Matt, my cousin Michael kind of hidden, and I love my cousin Megan's face in the foreground because it's just kind of iconic of the kids table experience, is it not? Now, we are eating in a room that my grandparents called the TV room. If you were to go down the hall and around the corner, you'd be in the dining room where the adults' table was. Now, the adults ate on a nice wooden table. What are we eating on? Card table. Yeah, the adults had nice china. We usually had paper plates. This particular meal, we're living large with plastic plates at the kids' table. The adults' table had sparkling conversation. Somehow our conversation usually degenerated into rolls being thrown at each other and a Jell-O snorting contest. The adults had cloth napkins. We have no napkins in this picture. And if you look closely, somebody pointed out to me, look at that lock on the door. Like, no matter what, don't let the kids out of the kids' table. Why are we talking about the adults' table and the kids' table? Because it sounds a lot like how we're living as churches these days. We have our adult pastors and our student pastors, our adult worship services and our student worship services, our adult short-term missions and our student short-term missions. Now, is there a time and a place for 6 and 16 and 42 and 66-year-olds to be on their own talking about life stage issues? You bet there is. But one of my life mantras is that balance is something we swing through on our way to the other extreme. And in our well-intentioned, let me say that again, well-intentioned efforts to offer relevant and meaningful and loving, I love that that's the theme of this week, loving ministry to young people, we have segregated them from the rest of the church. And that is not a verb I use lightly. If I said to you, when you go back to your church this weekend, why don't you sit by race? Why don't you gather by ethnicity? You would and should look at me and say, Kara, that's an abomination. And yet we do a different kind of segregation almost every time our churches and congregations gather. It's an age segregation. Now, this is a far cry from what Jesus himself experienced as a young person. If you have your scriptures, will you turn with me to Luke 2? I love this account because we get a glimpse of Jesus as a 12-year-old. Luke 2, probably a familiar passage to us, but I want to bring something new that at least I've come to appreciate recently. So starting at verse 41, Luke 2, 41 to 47. Every year, Jesus, meaning Jesus' parents, went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. There was a custom that Jewish boys would go to specific feasts, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, and that's what Jesus was doing with Joseph and Mary. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. And some of you might be thinking, what kind of parents were Joseph and Mary to not realize Jesus was gone for a day? But in this time, the men would travel together, the women would travel together, and the children would run back and forth. So Joseph would think Mary had Jesus, Mary would think Joseph had Jesus. So they travel on for a day, and then they get together at the end of the day. Wait, you don't have Jesus? You don't have Jesus? What do? When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, it's bad enough that Joseph and Mary are apart from Jesus for 1 day. Now we're at 3 days because they had to go back and then they had to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple court, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Jesus was 12. I'm a mom of a 12-year-old son, and I have one pressing question. During those 3 days, who fed Jesus? Where did he sleep? Who took care of him? Now, we don't know, the text doesn't say for sure, but I'm going to guess it was the faith community that saw this 12-year-old boy and thought, they saw him and they thought, we are going to step in and meet this 12-year-old boy's needs. But then they did more than that. They listened to him, asked him questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. You see, Jesus as a 12-year-old, he wasn't put aside at a kid's table. He was welcomed to an intergenerational table. And as a result, not only were Jesus' needs taken care of, but look what happened to the adults who spent time with young Jesus. They were amazed. They grew too. As I think about the kids' table that I experienced growing up, as I think about what Jesus himself experienced, which was not a separate table, but was intergenerational, I think about our sticky faith research. I'm the executive director of the Fuller Youth Institute and a faculty member at Fuller Seminary. And our mission at the Fuller Youth Institute, or FYI, we take the best research and turn it into practical resources for all adults who care about kids. And right now, we are really motivated by the reality that 40 to 50% of young people who graduate from my church and from your church, from my family and from your family, are going to drift from God and from the church after graduation. 40 to 50%. So take a picture of the young people that you care about in your family, community, neighborhood, church. Imagine taking a picture of them. And then imagine getting a red pen and putting an X across 40 to 50% of their faces. As a leader, a follower of Jesus, and a mom, I'm not satisfied with that. Are you? That was really lackluster. If you're satisfied with that, then we might as well adjourn now and go hang out at that shopping mall across the street or something. Let's try that again. When I think about almost 1 out of 2 young people drift from God and from the church after graduation, I say I'm not satisfied with that. Are you? No. So thanks to a grant from the Lilly Endowment, we at the Fuller Youth Institute studied over 500 youth group graduates during their first 3 years in college. And I'll tell you, I want to say it's never too early nor too late to be thinking about long-term faith, or what we call sticky faith. Our kids in our family are 12, 10, and 6, and the way that I talked to my kids on the cell phone tonight was different because of our research. When it comes to this age segregation that we see in churches, what our research is showing is that is toxic to young people's faith. We looked at 13 different youth group participation variables, 13 things that young people tend to do in the context of youth group. Was service and justice related to sticky faith in both high school and college? You bet it was. Was being in a small group, I lead a small group every Sunday morning in my congregation, was being in a small group related to sticky faith in high school and college? You bet it was. But the factor, the variable most highly correlated with sticky faith in both high school and college, it wasn't service and justice, it wasn't even Sunday school, It was intergenerational worship and relationships. It was getting kids not separate in the kids' table, but getting them mixed in the overall life of the church. That, according to our research, is one of the most important things we can do to build long-term faith in young people. Now, as we've been sharing about sticky faith all over the country, we've come to be misunderstood, with people saying, well, those sticky faith folks, they want to abolish all youth ministry. We are not saying to abolish all youth ministry. Remember, there is a time and a place for us to be together talking about life stage issues. But what I am saying to you all here tonight at Mission America is that you are some of our country's most influential leaders. And I want to invite you to dream with me and dream with our team at the Fuller Youth Institute about how we can together take baby steps, medium steps, or maybe even large leaps at times to bring the generations together. Part of what I love about my role at the Fuller Youth Institute is I get to track with amazing churches all over the country and see how they are building sticky faith. And a lot of them are doing it through intergenerational worship. Intergenerational worship. Maybe it's one weekend service every quarter. Maybe it's once a month. Maybe it's for 10 minutes. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is for the context in which you serve. But we just experienced amazing worship here this evening. I feel closer to you because we have worshiped together. And I want that with members of all generations. There was one church that wanted to send a really powerful sticky faith message about intergenerational worship. And it was a typical Sunday morning worship service, an all-adult worship music team. And there was a guitarist who started the first song. You can tell I don't play guitar, but there was a guitarist who started the first song. And he was a few sentences into the song when a young person, a teenager, came up from the side of the congregation, walked up onto the platform, tapped the adult on his shoulder. The adult handed his guitar over to the teenager. The adult had a seat, and the teenager resumed playing. Then there was a drummer on the back of the platform